and welcome to this episode of Pause with Nandini on NRI Affairs. Today I have Babu Gogineni with me, who is an Indian humanist, rationalist, and human rights activist. He served as executive director of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. He is the founder of South Asian Humanist Association and Indian Humanists. He's also the founder and owner of Skillguru, which is a training organization. He is a French language teacher. Apparently, he also has taught German. In his activism, he has campaigned against established privilege and abuse of rights done in the name of religion. And I bet he's got a lot of interesting stories about, exposing conmen and godmen of all hues. So we'll hear a little bit about that. But more seriously, he has led worldwide campaigns for the protection of Bangladeshi writer Taslima Nasreen. He's brought Pakistani free thinker Yunus Sheikh to safety in Europe, and in India, he successfully led the campaign for the rehabilitation and protection of rights of Sambhavi, a child who was claimed to be a reincarnation of a Buddhist goddess. So a lot of interesting work, a lot of stories. Let's just get right into it. Since I heard him speak very recently, and there was a lot of discussion about caste, I would like to begin with that. But first, I'll just say hello and welcome.
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you. Thank you for also attending that lecture on Zoom.
Yes, it was interesting, and I thought it would be great to have you as a guest here, because very rarely do we get guests who've had so much exposure across so many different fields. And I really wanted to talk about some of the things that seem to be quite pressing at the moment, and also giving rise to a little bit of confusion in people's minds on what it all means. So let's sit down and dissect some of the big issues. Sure. So as a lot of us know that recently Seattle passed the anti-caste resolution in its assembly. A lot of colleges, including Boston and in California, Harvard University, have passed similar policies since 2019. The Georgia Assembly passed a resolution condemning Hindu phobia, right? And it became the first US state that condemned anti-Hindu bigotry, and it has been acknowledged and seen as a major issue. What do you make of this? What do you make of all of this? And one of my questions is that you have said in one of your TED talks that belief drives behavior. And living in Singapore, I also witnessed firsthand how the implementation of laws over the long term drives behavior as well. So where do you see this making an impact? Firstly, what does caste mean in the diaspora? How does it play out? And why do you think this was necessary? What do you think of the counteraction? Let's just get your views on this.
That's a lot of things, Nandini. But perhaps we should start with caste issues. I was engaged with the caste issues already during the Durban Conference of the United Nations, which was a conference against racism and xenophobia. And then subsequently, we worked with the United Kingdom's human rights organizations to get the House of Lords to adopt resolutions and propose legislation against discrimination based on caste. The diaspora in India, is largely, at least in the Western countries, from the dominant castes. So they have a grip on the politics of the nation they are living in, and they managed to influence the Conservative Party to the extent that it did not go beyond the House of Lords. This shows us the complexity, which has now repeated in the US, as you mentioned. These are symbolic things. The United Kingdom or Australia, or let's say France and some cities in the US saying caste discrimination is wrong, We do not allow that, and it can be punishable. It's good. I'm not at all denying the goodness of this, but its significance is really symbolic. It really should happen where large-scale violation of human rights is happening. Now, that is in South Asia. So let's keep that in mind while welcoming the positive developments. Now, what happened in Georgia is a response. There is a fairly rich group of people who want to defend the image of their religion, who want to influence how textbooks are written, describing the problems with caste. Suddenly, one of the world's most egregious human rights problems gets portrayed as a division of labor. Whereas Dr. Ambedkar told us that it is not division of labor, it is division of laborers. And he also told us when Indians leave India, they will take the caste problem with them. Now, you said, what do I think of these problems with the diaspora? Number one, they come from the dominant caste mostly. Number two, the world's largest diaspora. Of course, we are all African. We are all the African diaspora, born of one single mother, probably 300,000 years ago, but more recently. The Indian diaspora is 30 million people, 3 crores of them. Except for the ones who were the slaves of the British Empire, but called indentured labor. Most of the others who went on their own are those who could leave, are those who could afford to do so. Now, you can imagine that the psychological response of those who leave their land and their culture is usually very confused. They are confronted with a different civilization outside their homeland, and they have no proper guidance on how to respond to this. This usually means that they come up confusing religion and culture and defending what would be the indefensible. These are the ones who are eloquent and can speak well, and they, instead of simply identifying the greatness of Indian civilization, will also defend its social structure, which is deeply problematic. So these become people, agents of inequality, defenders of a pernicious system of discrimination. Now, these are people who complain about racism when they leave their country and go to white man's land. I can tell you, when I went to lecture in Nigeria, people call me white man. Can you believe me? So we do have different responses. When people see injustice, they spontaneously respond to it. But very often, pseudo-patriotism, pseudo-nationalism, and a blinkered view of what human life should be and values are leads people to defend really the indefensible. So I was saying we have to talk of where the problem really exists. That is South Asia. That is South Asia because most of the problems of discrimination and inequality and dominance in South Asia is called caste. But exactly what I said now, the disability due to birth, something that you cannot alter despite the best of your efforts, the taboos associated with impurity, these are not unique to South Asia. We can see it in almost every human society. It's a disease of the human society. So we see it in animist Nigeria, in the Igbo land. We see it in one time, 1,000 years ago, in Sweden, 600 to 700 years ago in Spain and in France. We see it today in Islamic Yemen. We see it today in Islamic Pakistan, in confused Bangladesh, in India, in Sri Lanka. We see it even now in Japan. Now, and in South Korea. North Korea, we have no clue what's happening there. It's there in Tibet, and it's there in Myanmar. Now, what are the degrees of discrimination? Depends really on a particular situation. But broadly, when you have a disadvantage, a lifetime disadvantage that you cannot alter by human effort because of your descent, and because that is associated with a taboo, which is linked with possibly your profession, the profession being one which deals with dirt, putrefaction, death, or it could simply be by descent. Now, this exists everywhere in the world, including in Western Europe, as I mentioned just now. But when the Portuguese came to India and they saw it in India, they used the word caste, a variation of the word caste. So the human disease, the disease of human society, of discrimination, of social stratification, which is not amenable to reform or even any kind of modification without immense resistance, exists all over the world. The Portuguese call this, in South Asia, caste. Caste exists everywhere. And caste is, so to say, the hook on which every other discrimination and injustice can be hanged on to. This is what it is. Now, the diaspora.
If I may interrupt, when you say it is a disease of the human race, and you obviously profess a scientific temper and scientific solutions, do you think there is a solution then to this disease, which is rooted in science?
Well, we do see a great improvement in the lot of the people called and treated as of the lowest caste or the casteless, excommunicated and sent out of human habitation. We see an improvement in their lives. It's not that we say it is how things have been, say, 500 years ago, even 200 years ago, or even 100 years ago. There is significant marked improvement. And to answer your question, whether we can use science or not for this, you know the story in the Bible of Naaman, who is an army general who got leprosy. And Naaman goes to the prophet Elisha for treatment. And of course, the prophet cures him. And Naaman wants to give him gifts, and he refuses. And he says, just go back to Syria and all is well. But as he is going back to Syria, a servant of the prophet Elisha stops Naaman and says, you know, he changed his mind. He said, I should carry the gifts you brought for him to take it back. Of course, that was not originally the plan of Elisha. It is a story that was created. Now, when Elisha comes to know of this, he curses his servant with leprosy, which he cured Naaman of. And he says, your posterity forever will have leprosy. Now, assuming that the Bible was written and more or less finalized 300 years into the modern era, under the supervision of government-sponsored scholars, assuming that is how it happened, it took up to 1500, so that's 1200 years, for people to continue to treat people in France who they thought were the descendants of that thief, servant. It took 1200 years for them to say that they were human too, and they petitioned Pope Leo X. From then up to 1789, French Revolution, was a struggle of 200 years, proving that they do not carry leprosy, that they do not transmit it. This was through science that they did it. First, the Pope gave religious reasons why it should not continue. It made no difference. Then King Louis XIV in the 1600s, he appointed a commission which looked into the matter, examined the people who were called the Cago in France or the Ago in Spain, and found out that they had no physical deformities, that their feet were not flat, that their touch was not contaminating, that they were not carrying, and therefore they would not transmit leprosy. They used the science of the day to show that. Now, after this happened, the parliaments of Toulouse and the parliament of Bordeaux, they passed a law saying discrimination is not allowed. But it took up to 1789, the Great French Revolution, when it was strictly outlawed, punishments meted out to people who were carrying it. What is the 1789 revolution powered on, apart from the guillotine? It was powered on the Enlightenment ideas of reason, of science, of looking for facts, arguing about values, coming to a conclusion about these. Now, this is the exact same process that we need to employ to rid the world of the infirmity that it suffers from today, of not being able to consider every human as morally, as persons carrying an inherent dignity about themselves. Only science, because there is one religion which tells you that man, by which they mean human, but probably they didn't even mean human when they said women, because women were not really considered part of the human race. But one religion said man was born a sinner. Now, if you believe that man is a sinner, why would you attribute dignity to that human? Your entire life is spent trying to get rid of that sin by denying your essential humanity. So religion has no real answer. There's another religion which will say all men are equal, but has no say about the women in that religion. There's another religion, the one we are familiar with, which talks of this hierarchical division of society, where every birth is a death sentence the moment you are born in the oppressed caste. Now, we are talking nearly 25 crores of people, 250 million people. What has improved the lot of these people over the last 150 years. It is the values of the Enlightenment. It is the concepts of human rights and their expansion. And for sure, it is an understanding of our common humanity that is not established by talking of the caste system, which divides humanity. It is got through this cosmopolitan view of the human race, of the universality of human values, of the universality of human rights. The most recent articulation of these values in the world comes from Western Europe. But 2000 years before Western Europe did it, it started in India with the Buddha. So, as the great thinker and historian Will Durant said, civilizations don't die, they just migrate. So something good started in India, it spread around the world. Today, what the Indian diaspora is doing is not spreading that greatness of India. They are carrying varna and caste. And caste is not simply an incestuous social system of marriages inside the community. It's more than that. It's an instrument of oppression, of denial of humanity. So it requires all our efforts of religion, which has for long supported it, of science, which can expose the basis on which inequality is sought to be established as divinely ordained or socially correct. In a university in India, they started already 15 years ago a research project to look into finding a justification for the caste system in our genes. So we need science to address it. We need political policy and social policy for the emancipation of the victim. But we are all caught in this whole giant effort to uplift something like 250 million people out of their misery. We are confronted with superficial discussions about policy, about reservations, and whether that is correct or justified or not. That's an argument that certainly should be had, but that's not simply what it means to get rid of the caste system. It's this entire panoply of things that need to be addressed.
Thank you for that. No, I really think that you've kind of given a really holistic sort of an idea of how caste actually is playing out. I have heard you say though that you understand the draw of religion, and in some ways you see how it has played out in its usefulness in some areas. However, generationally, do you think there's a difference now with the way younger people are viewing the world, and the place of religion in their lives has loosened in some ways, has diffused in some ways? And what do you think the younger generation will sort of respond to in terms of caste and religion and the role all of this plays in their lived experience?
I think this is a very complex question to answer because, like William James, we must first now then try to define what we mean by religion. And then identify the various stages of a religion. Clearly, let's say 200 years ago, there were hardly any non-religious people. The whole world was religion. So one might think, without zooming in into the detail, one might think that everything that happened in humanity's history that is recorded and can be historically attributed to the existing religions. So that takes us back to about 3,000 years. not much more than that. One might say much of it happened under the umbrella of religion and sometimes despite it. It really depends on what phase of religion we are talking about. What might have started? This is speculation, sometimes unreasonable justification. What might have started as an inquiry into the universe, nature, and the happenings of nature, and an attempt to control it through magical incantations and so on, might have been a sincere, intelligent, even a rational approach to understanding the universe and possibly even the human. Now, surely that was the case in some societies. Probably that interpretation is transposed onto the path of all societies. That may not be justified. But religions go through phases. It could be a space of free inquiry, going the wrong way, because how can you base a conclusion without facts? What will you base it on? A speculation is always a speculation. It needs some kind of justification when it has to be the belief of the multitude, not simply a personal one. Here, no one's bothered about a personal belief. It is when it is amplified into society, where it will then decide the direction of that society and the values that prevail in it. That is where the issue comes in. So there is the personal attempt to find what might be the truth, what might be the right way of living, and so on. Now, again, a German thinker very memorably said, religion is an enterprise of answers. Science is an enterprise of questions. For religion, the answers are eternal. For science, the questions are eternal. So you see, having started on that, having come to certain conclusions, these became petrified, solidified, fossilized as the truth that could not be questioned. So the initial inquiry was tremendously important and would certainly have happened and has happened even before religion started. It's important to disassociate the milestones in human development from religion, which is very recent. It took 20 lakh years, 2 million years, for Homo habilis to simply learn how to use the stone and chisel it and make what looks like a very primitive tool for hunting or carving something. 20 lakh years. There was no religion. There was biology there and learning. So when we talk of progress in human society, it comes from the development of the brain. Look, if we had, and it would be such an odd picture, if we had eyes to the side, like almost all animals do, the primates don't, but almost every animal has eyes to the side, or definitely not the advantage that frontal vision provides. If we didn't have frontal vision, if our frontal lobe had not developed, because we started feasting on meat, because then the protein feeds the brain in a way grass cannot, and developed the brain, and we have the opposable thumb. So we don't anymore just hang from branches of trees, scared of the next predator, but we are able to look at things and understand them. There was no religion there. There was no concept of God. There still are societies, tribes, which don't believe, have no notion of a creation God or of religion. There is order in their society, but that's not religion. There's no book or a holy book because they don't even know how to write. But still, they have progressed. Now, as I said, the first inquiries of the human, the first progress, was without the aid of religion. Now, language, one of the greatest or possibly the greatest achievement, or the motor for the achievements that followed, enabled ideation and helped people to think. Now, how to think is the matter here. Now, if there is no method to think, then what is now creatively, deceptively, and self-delusionally described as an attempt to approach an explanation to the universe was really mistakes of the time, of the period, and stories of the time reflecting the values of the time. When that solidifies, we end up with present-day Hindutva society, not Hindu society, but Hindutva society, the African Christian societies of today, the fundamentalist, theological, ordained social organization and behavior in Islamic countries. So I am differentiating between the idea of religion and the petrification of those ideas and their imposition on society through a system which can be political, social, cultural, which comes together. So a lot of people who are very much interested in religion and want to believe in religion are picking up a few things to satisfy themselves. But look, all the period in human history which historians, sociologists, philosophers, thinkers, I'm not talking of the non-thinkers of social media, talking of the thinkers, when they look at human history, all the periods called the Dark Ages are the periods where religion dominated society, dictated it, held society in its death embrace. So, look, today, who will say Christianity is an intolerant religion? Very few. Most of them will say Christianity has a problem with women, not in the laity, not in civil society, but just in the church hierarchy. They may not want them to rise up. Even though some women disguised as men became popes in the past, knowingly, no one would, in the Catholic hierarchy, still contemplate a woman being the head of the Catholic Church. However, if you look at Christian society, you will say, look, they have a problem with homosexuality because God then killed all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and so on and so forth. And Uganda might, as they did just, I think, 10 days ago or so, pass a legislation which we have been resisting, fighting for several decades, a law to punish homosexuality by the death penalty. Incidentally, I organized a conference in 2005 or 2006 in Uganda, and homosexuality was a theme of our conference, and they almost arrested me. They took away my passport at the airport 3 weeks or 2 weeks later. But that was just a threat. Now it's a law. Already then, in the government-run newspaper, there was an edit page article. Humanists organized a meeting in Uganda They said, Homos invade Uganda. Now, all this is based in Christianity. But I say but without taking away from the seriousness of the discrimination against homosexuals, against a legitimate place for women if the church is legitimate. Beyond that, you don't associate Christianity with much more than these stupid prayer oils and speaking in tongues, which are seen as curiosities, sometimes damaging people, sometimes they taking over the bodily integrity of the vulnerable, especially children. So there is that. But who would say that Christianity was the original Taliban of the world? It was. 500 years ago, Christianity was burning. The Catholic Church was burning people. Just 20 years before Galileo was put in prison, 20 years, a friend of the Pope, by the way, before Galileo was being tried, Giordano Bruno, in the year 1600, was burnt at the stake. Now, Goya, the great etcher, painter, artist, destroyed all his works because he thought that he might be killed. That was Christianity. What was happening with Islam at that time? With Islam at that time, you had the Jews fleeing the Christians, going to the Muslim kings for protection. Now, they were, Maimonides, the great Greek thinker, where did he go? He went to seek refuge amongst the Muslims of the age, who embraced them and gave them protection. So religions go through these things. Now, Hinduism at one time was open and liberal, but you can't say that today when it has become politicized, which is why the distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva. Hindutva being the political agenda of those who want to use Hindu identity to formulate policies which almost everyone believes would be against and detrimental to human rights and human values. So when we say religion was good, I'm sure now you see I am saying it in a nuanced manner about certain phases of a religion. They all have these different stages. Buddhism with Siddhartha Gautama the Buddha, was a great thinking tool, a great emancipator of society from the then existing ideas of inequality. The Buddha knew no science, but he never went into that really. He was the one who, I think for the first time in human history, he was 90 odd years senior to Socrates, who had more superstitions than the Buddha ever did. He said, this is a way to live. And he required no God, no religion to propose this code of ethics of right living, right thinking. That's a great advance. That's a great advance in human society. When he opened the doors of his community to women later in his age, that was, and to people of all castes, he was setting fire to the social structure of the time. He was called Vedanindaka, the one who abuses the Vedas. Now, look at Buddhism of the Mahayana period. It is just Advaita repackaged, right? It is, look at Sri Lanka of today. Look at Myanmar of today. That's Buddhism too. But there are phases in that religion that we value, appreciate. But this is for the historian, right? We don't need all that. For nearly 100, 200 years, maybe 300 years, humanity has been discovering universal values based on fact, on inquiry, using reason. Reason is the touchstone for everything, for examining things, for rejecting authority. So, independent of religion, one can discover these eternal truths about human society and values, which were discovered already before religion, to re-establish them for the first time now on the basis of facts, not simply acclaimed facts of prophets with beards, but facts that are amenable to all, verifiable by all. This tremendous progress in human morality, this rolling out of human rights to every corner of the world, once illuminated by darkness of religion and primitive ideas, now shining with the prospect, the liberating prospect of modern values, liberal values, of science, of achievement of human society. This in itself is inspiring. We don't need to go back to dead prophets or prophets and people sent by messiahs sent by God who said they would die and come back to life 3 days later. What's the point of dying if you're anyway coming back to life 3 days later? That spectacle will unroll around the world in just a few days. How can it be good when someone says, I'm dying for you? How can death be good? It's time to leave the symbols of the past, because the great rituals of the past have only helped in keeping people, I think, shackled to the values that promoted these. I think we have to look forward, despite the temporary pessimism imposed by resurgent political religion. That too will pass. The story of the last 200 years tells us that. 250 years ago, there was no one who anyone would call or identify as a humanist beyond a handful in France, a few scared people in the United Kingdom, because they had already killed the Charvakas, right? And the Greeks were no longer interested in free thinking because Christianity had taken over. The Mutazilites were killed already 1,000 years before. The rationalists amongst the Islamic community, amongst the Muslim community. And look, despite that, despite just being a handful, or let's say a few thousand around the world, just a few hundred years ago, I exaggerate when I say 250 years, but I think 500 would be more accurate while being vague. But in these 500 years, we have come to a stage where Pew Research tells us, sociological research tells us, that about 120 crores of people, that is 1.2 billion people, identify themselves today as non-religious. Some of these are probably not atheists. They are what is confusedly called spiritualism, which is a big scam of the century. Some of them may be people saying, we believe in some kind of power which initiated the universe. Let's say the one who did the batti jalawing for the Big Bang. Because they think the Big Bang is like a Diwali cracker. You have to light it, it'll explode. But the Big Bang was not really a bang. It was an expansion. However, there's 120 crores of them, 1.2 billion saying that. Compare that to 1.5 billion Muslims after 1400 years. But the background to that was already 1,000 years of then desert religions. And Christianity with 2,000 years of being around, assuming Christ was a historical figure, because there's been no contemporary record, neither in the Roman chronicles of who has been crucified, nor by any historian of the time. And it's a repeat of a story of the Egyptian slaves, exact same story of virgin birth and coming back to life and so on. But assuming he was a historical figure, 2,000 years of which nearly 1,500 years of being in power and holding everything in grip, in its death embrace in Europe, but elsewhere too. That's 250 crores, 2.5 billion. And yet in 500 years, without power, the disinfecting characteristic of reason, of truth, as in the content of knowledge, as the great thinker, revolutionary M.N. Roy said. Truth is just the content of knowledge. When knowledge increases, perspective is allowed to develop. And human rights are there to guarantee and protect the one who wants to think, either for religion or against, but the space to think. And we got so many. Now, Iceland says more than 60% of the youth have rejected religion. 90% have rejected creationism. In England, it is head to head, neck to neck between the Christians and the humanists. In Scotland, they have gone beyond. In England, the growth has been 10% in the last so many years. So, and it's progressing that way. In Australia, by the end of 2023, it is believed that the humanists will catch up and go beyond the ones who say they are Christian. Now, this is telling us something, is it not? Netherlands and Belgium and Norway, Sweden, Denmark, all these countries have shown not just a majority of non-believers, with the various hues of their non-belief, like I said, starting from this vague spiritual scam up to the militant atheism of book burning. I think both these ends are not very amenable for discussion. But this range, this rainbow of non-belief in so many countries is an extraordinary phenomenon that needs to be recognized. Secondly, in those countries, political powers and entrenched power relations have meant that the privilege of religion continues even though society has changed. There is a Church of England, the King of England. Whether he should be King of England or not is a different question, but he is also the defender of the faith. He promised he would be defender of the faiths. But the fact is the faithless are in the majority. So the king is now the king of the minority. Now, by law, you can't be king, the monarch of Norway, of Sweden, and so many other countries, if you were not Christian, and not simply Christian, if you were not Protestant Christian. Now, things are changing. People are challenging. What took 2,000 years, 1,500 years of repression, autocracy, tyranny cannot be undone immediately. but it's bursting at the seams. The threads are coming loose. One can see that. Look, if religion was so good and so important and was really the way society should go forward, why would we need the Charter of Human Rights? We could have just taken up a holy book and said, we'll live by it. Because everything that went wrong was because of the holy books. The claim to exclusive access to the Creator, either through your schizophrenic phases or through your imagination or selfish claims, or simply fantasizing. The time for that is over. It has come to a point when a lot of people in the Christian church are saying, no, you must look at the Bible to interpret it, not literally. If you said that a few hundred years ago, then there would be human kebab very soon in the streets of Portugal, in Spain, France, in Italy. There was no Italy then, but the separate city-states of Italy. They just burn you. They just kill you. Today, the church is saying this. The church said, oh, sorry, we didn't mean to do that to Galileo. Who in the world, or to speak of in their language, who the hell asks you to first even make a judgment about it? Galileo himself said, the Holy Book teaches us how to go to the heavens, not how the heavens go. And yet they were killing people. And today you have these namby-pamby liberals who think that by not speaking the truth of the reality, they are making it possible for religious people to reform themselves. So lying is a method of reform, according to them. Of ignoring the facts is a method of reform, according to them. Because these people, with their superficial understanding of the progress, growth, reform, and revolutions in value social systems, think with a whiskey glass in their hand, watching Arnab Goswami on television, thinking they know the way to change society. No society can progress or reform without reason. Reason is the motor for reform. Now, whether reason is wholly embraced or partly is dependent on the person advocating it. But even when partly it was embraced, society progressed. Show me in the history of 5 continents, of 100 odd countries, of 1,000 societies, where society became better through the adoption of unquestionable claims about divinity, the origin of the universe or its functioning, or through the words of a prophet. It's despite it. By prophets, I also mean the bearded rishis. So I mean everyone who claims divine knowledge, who claims to be able to curse you like Naaman was cursed, and your posterity with disease. Now, with damnation. If you can't do it in this world today, you would do it after you die. These guys don't leave you even after you die. So they put you in hell. Now, when I, as an atheist, I'm an atheist by conclusion. I'm a humanist by identity. When, as an atheist or as a humanist, I speak, the religious people are deeply hurt. They feel that this is an attack. Whereas all the blasphemy laws are weaponized to kill and send. You mentioned Dr. Yunus Sheikh. He was given the death penalty. The sentencing was for death penalty. He was in death penalty cell when we got him out of Pakistan. These guys are saying that the protest by the free thinker is offensive to their religion? In India, Article 295, all its versions, but definitely Section 295A, is invoked, is weaponized as a law against people. Now, in your question, you also referred to the law. Law reflects morality sometimes, or dictates the mores, the values of society at times. Now, by bringing in the blasphemy laws, it has set a standard of behavior. It has given a warning, and this is a punishment on the freedom of thought. What use is the freedom of thought if you have not the freedom to express that thought? Now, who has rights? It's individuals, not even communities. Rights reside in the individual. Now, if you were to punish people for holding a thought or for expressing it, you are saying that the ideas that they are criticizing have rights. Ideas and thoughts have no rights. It's individuals who have rights. So the right to offend is inherent in the right to express your views. Of what use or how nonsensical it would be to have a freedom of speech, which is really to agree with you.
So that makes sense. Let's quickly, because this is a long discussion, and
yes, it is.
I do appreciate all the sort of wisdom that you brought in drawing a timeline of how religions adapt and how the cycle works, and also the fact that rationalist thought is gaining such prominence around the world in spite of religion. I do
In
want
spite of governments promoting it.
in spite
Where
of
governments don't promote it, these die of their own.
Right. I do want to talk to you a little bit, though, about science and the fact that while it has completely changed our lives in so many ways for the better, obviously science is at the forefront of military expansion. It's at the forefront, perhaps, of also some of the shadow side of artificial intelligence, of mind control, of what we are seeing across social media, and the fact that it can be weaponized as well. Now, again, we come back then to human beings who are using the tools of science, perhaps for good or bad or whatever it is, depending on political needs, social needs, economic needs. How do you then sort of envisage a future where science and scientific thought leads human development? And how can that be ensured that it has a humanistic aspect to it?
I think science and the scientific temper is, I will say, of a kindred spirit with humanism. Both humanism, rationalism, and science assume that the universe exists, that it is matter that exists, that it is material, as opposed to people saying this is Maya, it doesn't exist. Science, humanism, rationalism do not believe that there is anything beyond the life that we have. It gives us, so there is no rebirth, there is no afterbirth, there is no hell or heaven. This completely destroys the assumptions of religion. Now, science, therefore, is saying this is what we have. Humanism, too, is saying that. And let us examine it. We do not come with assumptions. We examine things. We need a way to measure things. The difference between the Greeks of then, the Indians of 2000 years ago, and those of today is that then they had the ideas, but they didn't have the mathematics or the observation skills enabled by instruments to come to the same conclusions today. Materialist, naturalist approach and understanding of the world. This is science. Science is an approach to discovering the truth, facts. Your question bears on the use of the knowledge that science has unleashed. That is a domain of politics. That is a domain of technology. That's a domain of military. These are governed by the old ideas and values of not keeping the human at the center. Humanism is the approach of keeping the human at the center of things. The United Nations is founded around humanist ideas and principles. The United Nations top people at the time of its founding were all humanists. In fact, you mentioned I was the executive director of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. Its founding congress was presided by Sir Julian Huxley, who was the founding director, Secretary General of UNESCO. Now, the founder of the World Health Organization and the Food and Agricultural Organization were humanists. Bertrand Russell was associated with them. Karl Popper's ideas. What are all these ideas about? They're not about the dominance of the human through the technology that science has made available. Einstein never said yes to the atom bomb. Einstein himself was a humanist. Einstein rejected religion. He called it the measles of humankind, infantile measles of humankind. So the point I'm making is it's not the scientists who are creating these problems, number one. It is not entirely the responsibility or uniquely the responsibility of a class of people who discover truth to ensure the deployment of it is correctly done. The rest of society has to catch up with the ideas, the human rights community, civil society. You will know that in lots of countries in Western Europe, nuclear power is no longer the policy. Many countries have abjured the use of the nuclear bomb. That is clearly an advance towards humanism. When we say the United Nations has the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG, and say there is a, it's still not attained, but there are certain deadlines by when you should achieve. Achieve what? Health for all. Achieve what? Human rights and emancipation for the most oppressed categories of society. We start with women. The poorest category of human society is women. The most exploited, along with women, are children. The most neglected are old people. Why did in 2000 years, none of these people talk about this till the United Nations came in and say that? So the dying gasp of religious values when they say, look, science has done all these things. No, science will let you address the problems which are legacy problems. Now, more people today are better fed than they ever have been in human history. Science made it possible. It brought in environmental issues. So who is solving those environmental issues? Mantras, prayers, prayer oil? Science is doing that. 30 years ago, they spoke about what over Australia, the tear in the ozone layer. What caused it? CFCs caused it. Human activity caused it. What solved it? Science did. No one's talking of the ozone layer, the tear in the ozone layer anymore. So the alarmists will always be there, and they are needed to make sure the focus is kept of what we need to achieve and what we should achieve with science. Only a human-centered humanist approach can make sure that will happen. When you don't do that, look at what's happening in the name of Hindutva in India. as simple as nutrition for children. The
Yes.
most malnourished children category in the world is the Indian children. What was the solution found to that? Already from nearly 40 years, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, now Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh and other states, they introduced the noon meal system.
Amen.
So if you go to school, you give them food to eat. What is the malnourishment about? It's not a debate between vegetarianism and non-vegetarianism. That is the dominant caste argumentation, again for time pass. Between the human and the animal, the choice should be human. I have no second thoughts about it. Protein is required. Protein is required of a certain quantity. Instead of letting children eat eggs every day at school, because of their caste food habits, not even religion food habits, because in the Hindu caste system, Varna system, it's only the ones which are dominating, which do not today eat meat. But the stories in the Ramayana tell us that they were eating, including the gods, including beef. But today, that is their habit. I don't grudge that. That's their habit. But to now impose it, a caste food habit, to impose it on the general populace, to the detriment of that populace's health. Malnourished children going to school and denied nutritious food because your caste does not allow it and you are a policymaker. That's not science, that is anti-science. So I will invite everyone to reconsider the fears that are associated with science. There are challenges that science has thrown at us. Cloning was a big problem. Is it today a problem? Hybridization was a problem in the 1800s. Is it a problem today? No. It has provided food for everyone. All these pot-bellied, well-fed people sitting and arguing about the problems of the world that science has created are overfed because of the achievements of modern agriculture. Now, they are the ones who are saying you should not have hybrid varieties of food in Africa. What solved the hunger problem in India? Was it not hybrid varieties? Why would you deny that to those in Africa? Because of this hysteria about genetically modified. Yes, by all means, test them before you unleash it, before you release it, either as information or as product. And then we should be all right, I think. The only argument I find rather compelling about genetically modified foods is that they say when you eat too much genetically modified foods, you tend to get a bit crazy, especially corn. And considering the United States of America has been having a high dose of hybrid corn, looking at the people they have recently been supporting and continuing to support, I think there's an argument there for closer examination.
On that note, I think we have to call this, as the last question. But, obviously these questions need and deserve deep inquiry. And I'm so grateful that you could come on the show and talk to us about all of this. Much remains unexplored. But since we are bound by time, I think we will end with this because there's a lot to ponder even in what you have shared with us. Possibly we'll have you back for part 2 of this discussion.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this wisdom and knowledge with us.
Thank you, Nandini.